Okay, good morning, everyone. We welcome you. We welcome you here in Dean Willie Hall. Hello out there. And we welcome you if you are a participant online. We're so glad you're with us today. We were just remarking that today we have our team is here in person in Dean Willie Hall. We have Kyle. Thank you so much, Kyle, for always being with us. And our other members of our team are here. So this is the first for us, and we are glad things are getting just a little bit more loosened up as we go along. So today, Jim McPhee and I are going to be your presenters, and we're going to be leading you into thinking about some spiritual practices that have been handed down over the years. And these are ways that people have learned about how to be in closer relationship with God. And today's forum is going to be a little bit different kind of format because we want you just a little bit more involved in it. And so we're going to be giving you some examples of how to pray. And then we're going to be asking you to do some reflection on how you actually do pray and how what we are talking about might be relevant to your style of prayer. So if you're in Dean Willie Hall, I want to make sure everyone here has a piece of paper and something to write with. And for you at home, I'm going to ask you to just get a sheet of paper or a legal pad, or it can be anything that has one whole big sheet that you can write on and something to write with. So if you would go and find that now and have it handy as we move along. So in terms of how to be in relationship with God and how to pray, prayer is a way that we are in a relationship with God, how we communicate with God. And there are probably as many different ways of how to pray as there are people. And the first thing I want you to understand is that how are you praying? However you pray, whenever you pray, whatever style of prayer, it does not matter. All of it counts. And as I said, there are so many ways to pray. There's no right way or wrong way to do it. And not all kinds of prayer works for all people. So as leaders of the church, it is, we feel like it's our responsibility to help people to understand the different ways of praying, and then not just because of learning about those different styles, but then we began a very important process of discernment. Discernment is maybe one of my favorite words. We need to discern. We get in touch with what it is that speaks to our nature and the way that God created you uniquely to be who you are, and how that relationship of you going to relate with God. What is it that works for you? And then once we begin to discern what kind of prayer works for us, it's a good idea then to just do more of that. Like any other relationship, you know, it takes some investment of our energy, our time, our commitment to that other person. The same with God, that it's, if we think of it in terms of relationship and good relationship, then our responsibility is figure out how to do our part of that. And then we wait for God to respond to us. And then whatever way works for us, to do more of that is always a good idea, just to do more of that. So when we gravitate towards a certain way of praying, it's very good for us to articulate. Now, when I was growing up in another, it was not in the Episcopal Church, it was another denomination, but it didn't seem like we really talked about that much. We didn't articulate with each other how we pray. We might have just read some prayers or something like that, but we didn't really talk about how we pray. And I think it's very, very good for us to name that for ourselves, to know that for ourselves. And then the next step might be when we get in touch with how our way of prayer works best, we might want to share with another person about the way of prayer that speaks to him or her. And then we might find some common ground. So then we have two people relating to each other about some common ground and the ways of prayer. And then from there, community might begin to develop around a certain way of being with God, and that is helpful to people. And then the community becomes a faith-based community, which is, of course, what we are in the church in St. Paul's, here at St. Paul's. So when Christianity was in its early stages, and we had the first century, and then we had things happening in the second century and third and fourth. And so faith communities began to form, and as we know, at first, it was in small groups. It was in private houses. I'm talking about after we've had the birth, death, and resurrection events of Jesus. And so those faith-based communities were very small, but then they began to have more people. And so the communities grew larger. And so the faith communities then began organizing around different methods, different prayer styles of being in communion with God. And we began to see in about the 4th century, I would say, in about the 4th century, we could say this style is definite and this style is definite. And so these styles of prayer began to develop and organizing around these different methods, different ways of being in communion with God. So now, let's go to the 7th century and the year 664. And the place we want to zoom in on is a place, Whitby. Whitby is now in what is now England. Back then, I don't know how countries were organized, but it wasn't England. So anyway, Whitby, if you can imagine, somewhere in England. And there was a church council that was held in 664. This was a very important church council because what was emerging about that time is that two distinct approaches to being in relationship with God, two ways of praying, two different ways of worldview began to emerge. And so we really saw that take form. So for these purposes, this is just going to be a brief introduction into that time period in our history. Let's just name these two different ways of seeing how we relate to God this way. One way, we're going to call it faith community with a high degree of structure. Faith community with a high degree of structure. And that this became known in some circles as the Roman model. So high degree of structure, the Roman model. On the other hand, we had faith communities emerging and taking shape and taking form with a much more organic feel, with a low degree of structure. And this model became known as the Celtic model. Some of you have probably heard of Celtic Christianity, and maybe you even wonder what that might be. So today we're going to just jump into that and explore it a little bit. All right, so we have the Roman model, faith community with high degree of structure, Celtic model, faith community with low amount of structure. Now, I want to say that style is very valuable. Each one of these styles has so much to offer. And as these styles emerged, they were able to coexist for about 200 years. So you either just decide you were going to go the Roman way or you're going to go the Celtic way. And that was just fine. And everybody was able to live peaceably with that. But then here's what happened, is that people began to think that their way of being Christian was the right way. Their way of being Christian was the only way that was the real thing. And you know what happens when each camp has that certainty? There is conflict. Now, I've been thinking a lot about conflict lately and just getting down to the root of that conflict, and thinking about conflict in human relationship. We cannot be human for very long before we're going to have conflict. It's just a part of how we're made. So that's a given. We have conflict. The question for us is, how do we resolve it? How do we resolve conflict where we have one way of seeing, another way of seeing, and we have trouble coexisting? And here's the question I want to urge you to ponder. When conflict comes up, can we resolve it in a way that is beneficial for both sides? Can there be a win-win kind of way of moving through conflict? And not only win-win, but where we are stronger on the other side of that. So often, because we just get stuck in our human being ways of operating, I'd say so much of the time when conflict is not beneficial for both, but as what happens often is that the stronger voice wins. And then what happens is you have an emerging stronger voice. What happens to the other voice, the weaker voice, begins to disappear. This can be harmful in all kinds of ways. So the Synod of Whitby in 664, these two ways, the Roman model and the Celtic model, came into conflict. It was now conflict. And so it needed to be resolved. And I love this, that back in those years, we had male and female leaders, and there was no distinction in that. There were strong women leaders. So the abbess of the particular religious community was Hilda. And so she is known as Hilda of Whitby. And she's kind of an important person for me personally. And I love it that she's on the calendar of saints and that we acknowledge her as we move into her feast day. So at the Synod of Whitby, here's what happened. It was the Roman model that won. The Roman model was more organized. The Roman model had more structure to it. And so it won out. And from there, the Celtic model of seeing began to go underground. Now, this going underground happened gradually. I think it was the island of Iona, which is now off the coast of Scotland, that was the longest hangout or where it kept the Celtic model going, and that was several hundred years later. But the Celtic model of seeing began to go underground after that council. And some have said that this is a great tragedy because we lost a very valuable way of prayer that some might want to gravitate towards, but if it's underground, how do you get to it, first of all? You have to kind of take a lot of initiative to find it. But I will say that the Celtic way did not disappear completely. And as a matter of fact, when we know what to look for, we can find these threads, the continuation of these threads, this Celtic way of seeing in our liturgies, in our Book of Common Prayer, in our hymnals. And at the end of our session today, when we conclude, Jim is going to read as our concluding prayer, St. Patrick's breastplate hymn. And this way of thinking comes right out of that Celtic model, and it's played at every Trinity Sunday. We sing St. Patrick's breastplate. At most ordinations, we have St. Patrick's breastplate. So there it is. Right there is a living example of how the Celtic way of seeing did not go totally underground. Now, I want to say right up front, I am no expert in this field. This is not something I have studied or have a scholarly knowledge about. Almost everything I know, I learned from the Scottish theologian Dr. J. Philip Newell. And Larry and I first met him in 1997, and he's regarded as a major voice in the recovery of Celtic Christianity in both the 20th and the 21st centuries. He's still very active today in Scotland. And there was a time here at St. Paul's when he was here a lot, and he came to preach, he came to teach. He was part of our diocesan convention one year and was the keynote speaker. He's been at St. Paul's numerous times, and we continue to carry his books in our bookstore. So you see, the Celtic way has not died out. We can still find it. All right, so what is this Celtic way of seeing? From the earliest years of when we started to see it kind of take shape. So it was before this, because it's really pre-Christian, but really back in the 4th century is where we start to saw kind of a coming together. It's always been, the Celtic way has always been about finding God within. It is about hearing the voice of God, speaking from the very, very heart of life. And one of the features that is most widely recognized in Celtic spirituality is its emphasis on creation. Now, when it comes to creation, I think most people quite naturally grow up with a sense of awe and wonder in creation. And I've heard stories of children laying on their backs in the green grass of a backyard and feeling that green grass and smelling it and enjoying the brilliant green. Our Dean's sermon today spoke about that awakening of the senses, and children laying on their backs in the sun and looking up at the wonder of the skies and clouds. Well, this is very Celtic. This is very Celtic oriented. And I know that my very, very first human memory is that of the ocean waters. And I was only about 2 or 3 and toddling as fast as I could, wanting to immerse myself in those blue-gray waters. And parents and aunts and uncles frantically trying to catch up to me so I wouldn't just throw myself headlong in the waters. But I wanted to immerse myself in it. And that whole salt air was waking up my senses. So we're often in creation, we're taught to enjoy the beauty of creation, and that's good and fine. But the early Celtic ways would recognize that God is not only a beautiful feature, but within the very growing of plant life. God is within the energy of the crashing wave. And in nature provides us not only an avenue to enjoy beauty, but also an avenue that can bring us closer to God. We can be in relationship with God through nature, through the beauty of creation. So the Celtic way sees every breath of life and every living thing as being God-infused. And as the early Celts lived very, very close to the land, they were all about turning the soil, planting the seed, milking the cows, herding the sheep. There was a prayer for every aspect of life. We heard a little bit about talking about the influences in the Book of Common Prayer. In our School of Spiritual Direction yesterday, we heard our Bishop Polson talking about finding prayers under prayers and thanksgiving in the Book of Common Prayer, and that there is virtually a prayer for just about every kind of human condition in there. Well, that is a look back, although it's much, much more organized, those written down prayers, but that's the idea, that a prayer for every aspect of life. So prayers were intoned when a person would wake up in the morning, when putting on shoes, at the rising of the sun, eating and drinking, weaving and working. There was a prayer for everything, but not set hours of prayer. It was more spontaneous around when it happened, no matter what time of day. And the prayer was interwoven into every aspect of life more, and as life would unfold, then there was a prayer that went with that. Now, communities of faith did not necessarily back then have well-constructed, strong buildings, and so their gathering places were at the Celtic high crosses. And so, Kyle, if you would be so kind as to put up our picture, and this is still on the island of Iona, the Celtic high cross. I think it's the next one, Kyle. Yeah, there it is. Okay. That is the St. Martin's Cross, and it dates back to the 8th century, so the 700s. And these Celtic high crosses still exist in Ireland and Scotland. In fact, you can see them everywhere. And so what the community would do is that these were the gathering points. So someone might say, well, let's gather at the high cross at noonday tomorrow when the sun is high. And then the community would come around, and then prayers were offered. So as you can see, that is a very different way than, it wasn't like 9 a.m. on Sunday morning. It was more organic than that. And the building, the structure that you see behind there, that is the Abbey on Iona. And that modern structure, but it goes back to early times. So the Celtic high crosses, we have them everywhere. Okay, now Kyle, if you would go back to that page with the two big circles. Okay, now is the time for us to move into this reflection time. I want to invite you to take your paper and draw out and use as much of the page as you can, two interlocking circles, and make sure that you have that empty space in between. And I'll give you just a minute to get that drawn. Very, very, very simple, just two big old circles and interlocking. This is called a Venn diagram. Some of you may be familiar with that. And Venn diagrams are wonderful when we come to a little bit of self-discovery. So here's what I'd like you to do is to pick one of those circles, and I want you to reflect. Yes, thank you. Thank you, sir. Do not write in the central. Kyle, would you point to the central, the interlocking part there, the interlocking, a little bit over there. Do not write in there, but just in one of the sides or the other. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to reflect. When was a time when you were in nature and you just got uplifted? Something happened in your heart. Perhaps it was for you the presence of crashing waves of ocean, or maybe walking along a beach and feeling that wet sand on your feet, or even touching a tree in early summer and feeling the warm breeze on your face. Even like I did in early COVID, walking around in your neighborhood and that aroma of freshly cut lawn filling up your senses, or perhaps a starlit night. Remember, if you can, go into your memory and just begin to write down some notes about that. What part of nature were you enjoying? And as you record some of your experiences, your good experiences of creation, also just spend a moment with that experience and to see, what did it do for you? Did you have a sense of calm or an uplift of the heart, sense of peace? And put that in your circle too. going to a moment of quiet as you fill in part of your circle. Let's give this another 2 minutes.
Okay, I hope everybody's got some of those natural, prayerful moments captured in your circle there. Kyle, I guess we could move. Let's take one last look at that Celtic cross before we move on. Look at how elaborate that is and how it incorporates elements of nature and the rhythmic qualities of it. God in nature is a very ancient practice and predates Christianity, certainly. But that trust that people have or had that nature would be a place where you could find and encounter God in a prayerful way. Just all of that sensation, that intertwining of tendrils and rhythmic interlacing of nature that embraces us. However, on the continent, in the cities of the ancient Roman world and Roman Empire, there was a very different attitude. And part of it goes back to the Roman Empire itself. The Roman imperial state from very earliest times had put a lot of emphasis on identity and religious identity as coming through community, as being part of a community. And that whole focus, we have the ancient Roman temples, we have all kinds of monuments and religious edifices to the pagan gods. And of course, as Christianity evolved and became the official religion of the Roman Empire, there were all kinds of religious Christian structures as well, the basilica structures and so on. So religious and prayerful attitudes toward God really were to be found and trusted more in community events. And something that was percolating coming in from the Middle East, from Persia and the Sasanian Empire, Parthian Empire, was a distrust of the physical world, of nature. We know all about that. Even going back to the times of Plato, there was a distrust of the world and of nature as being a place where you could safely encounter God. And part of that was because of the notion of dualism, that the world was an evil place, that it was inhabited by demons and Satan. The world is a contaminated place, and it was not to be trusted. You could have all kinds of very deleterious things creep into your life, temptations and things, through the sensory experiences. Now, this was an attitude that was very pervasive. There was a religious leader called Mani and Manichaeanism that became a huge threat to Christianity. Mani came along about 200 AD, and about 150 years after Jesus. And his background in Zoroastrian dualism, that the earth is evil. It's a decayed reflection of what can be divine, that God's light are busy trying to escape out of the world. This whole notion began to percolate throughout the Roman Empire, and even the Romans persecuted Manichaeanism just as much as they persecuted Christianity, and I think they often confused the two. But that notion led to an uneasiness about being alone or isolated in your prayer times and in your approximation with God. You were really supposed to try to, you would find safety in numbers, where you could be together in prayer, in religious places, sanctioned religious places. One of the features of ancient Rome that we've kind of forgotten about, but has carried on in the Roman Catholic tradition, is the element of ancestor worship in the Roman family. And each house, particularly in the patrician houses, there would be an altar area, and it would be an altar dedicated to their favorite god or gods, and also in honor of their family. So the idea that you would have a prayer activity centering around a community and family elements, to the exclusion of nature, was another very important feature of continental Roman life and the prayer life that they had. From very early times, now we've got Saint Benedict. I think we've got an icon image of him. He lived about 470 to 530, so he was very early on. Oh, there's another beautiful view. And he was from Italy, Nursia, it's on the Italian peninsula. And he began to realize there were other monastic movements, but he began to realize the organizational power of prayer in community and getting to know God in community. Christian theology almost fell victim to the idea that Satan owns the world and that we're to flee from the world and we're to deny the world and all this. Well, that doesn't work well with Christianity, in that God came into the world and God participated in the world and God created the world. So the Christian vision really countered some of that really horribly negative imagery of the world. But to encourage each other and to engage with each other in prayer, you could do that, and you could in effect save the world. There's an element of that, save the world from evil by engaging in formal community and structured community. So these monastic groups began to form. They were very important because the population, the local population, and anybody could join the monastery. You didn't have to be rich or poor. The church was the great leveler of society. Now, yes, there were the high clerics, the bishops, and some of those who came from aristocratic and even wealthy backgrounds, and that was always a problem. But in the monastic groups, you could start from being just a pig farmer and rise to a very, very high level in that community. And that community exerted a very powerful local influence on prayer. And in the monastic community itself, again, high structure. distrust of kind of unorganized activities, Benedict, you can see, is holding the regula. And he formulated and actually maybe drew on some other monastic rules, but he wrote the very famous rule that monastics, particularly the Benedictines, follow to this day. Included in that is 7 times, your day is regulated by your prayer life. 7 times a day, because one of the Psalms referred to, I will turn to you 7 times a day, oh my God. So they tried to have prayer sessions 7 times a day, and just to be safe, have one at midnight too, where you would get together and say the offices. Of course, we have now evening prayer and morning prayer. Those are collations derived from that same idea, that same getting together in community for prayer. All right, let's take another look at some other developments here, Kyle. I think I've got another couple photos here that I just wanted to point out, that turning away from nature and toward imagery, religious imagery was another way to pray. And images of icons and saints, windows to the other world. Here's part of St. Benedict founded, of course, Subiaco in Italy. And this is, I believe, I pulled it off the internet, one of the central areas within the Subiaco complex. But notice there's not nature here, but there's a sense of wonder and awe that can place you into relationship with God. Even though this is a man-made human structure, it can lift you into relationship with God in a very effective way too. And that's very much what churches and basilicas and religious structures were designed to do. I mean, they're highly formulaic, highly regulated, but they were designed to lift you prayer with other people, and also to place you into prayer with the unseen saints and the invisible world as well. Let's look at another one of these clips that I had here. This is an interesting one. This is about 500 AD. It's a Byzantine mosaic in Ravenna, Italy, at the time of Hagia Sophia, which is now lost, in Istanbul. This particular church in Ravenna, I don't know if this is Apollinaire, there's several of them that were built by Justinian. But you notice, okay, here it is. Here's the religious focus. You are participating with Christ and the saints. You are together in a community having a religious and prayerful experience, and you're protected in that environment too. So part of the art time, the ecclesiastical structures were really designed to protect you from all that wayward nature stuff, all those tendrils out there that could ensnare you and lead you away from God. So this is just a mosaic in Ravenna, Italy. Let's look at one or two others here, Kyle. This is a window at Chartres, which of course is much, much later. But again, it's the structure. It's structurally bringing you into an attitude of prayer. It's designed to do that. The rose window with its beautiful symmetry, and then the other windows depicting saints and apostles. Again, this was all designed to bring you into communion with God and with other people who had experienced God deeply. So again, this is all very structural. It's not going to the seashore and listening for the voice of God in the wind. These were places designed and structured to provide for a prayerful experience. Okay, I think, and there's Monte Cassino. That was rebuilt. That was Benedict's resting place. It's still a monastery. I read where there's only 13 monks there, but when I was there about 3 years ago, the American cemetery from World War II is below that, and they were chanting the office while we were there. And It was glorious. The bells rang, and we thought, this is interesting, some nice bell tones there. And then we could hear these voices drifting across the countryside. And it sounded a lot more like 100 people. But anyway, it was glorious. And there again, that prayerful time together coming into the countryside and into the graveyard where thousands of graves was really moving. In our next step here, on the second circle that you have in the Venn diagram, I'd like to ask yourselves some questions, and this is more about times that you have been in a prayerful experience or led into a prayerful experience through structured activity, through very highly structured activity. So as you do that, think about where were you in this structured experience? Were you inside a church? Were you spending time in prayer with other family members? Times when you were not in isolation, but in a prayer group with friends, a member of a grief support group, pausing in silent prayer. Were you in church with other members of the community, saying a prayer that was a special part of Christmas liturgy? These are all structural times that would not exist if we did not have an organized religion or an organized church. Yes, we can encounter God walking, in nature, but we've also got a wonderful support community that exists in the church itself. So these are questions of, okay, how has your religious life helped to bloom by participation? Maybe even standing with others, listening to a special sermon that impacts you, just kneeling with others in prayer. These are structured community times. So on that second circle, write down some of those times that come to mind. I don't know if we have another slide here, Kyle, or not. Let's take a look at what else I sent. I went back and forth on what I was going to send. That was it. Okay, good.
We can go back to the circles.
Okay.
We'll take another minute to finish up on your reflections. Okay, as we move into this next part, we're going to do something really creative. We haven't done this yet in Dean Woolley Hall since we've been on Zoom for the adult formation, but because we have our expert Kyle Foster here with us, we're going to put you into breakout rooms of 3s and 4s, and you here in Dean Woolley Hall, you will make each table group will be a breakout room. So you'll be with others and to just talk through what came out of your prayer exercise, and then begin to see, are there some overlaps? Were there overlaps for you in the two different kinds of prayer? And that's what goes in the center, is when you begin to see common ground. And again, it's that we're not going to choose one or the other, saying this way is best, this way is not best, but rather these are just different. And then let's see if we can discover some common ground. So we'll come back, we'll give you we will give you about 10 minutes in this. And if you are online, then I'm going to ask Kyle to break you into breakout rooms now. Do I need to tell them? I didn't send out a message, so they can't hear me. This is great.
Well,
Okay, well, I guess we're drawing to the conclusion of our time together. Everybody's been very stimulated by this project. I think it's wonderful. I think it's been very good. In fact, if you're having as much fun at home as we're having in Dean Willey Hall, then you're having a blast. So sharing a lot of information with each other, a lot of experiences that cross us over into closeness with God that is shared and also individually noticed and participated in. So looking at your own prayer work, begin to notice if there's a common ground to both of your circles. When you look at your paper there, start to look in that intersecting area. What might share some common ground? And listen to the words of Patrick's breastplate here. This will be our conclusion. As we know, St. Patrick, patron saint of Ireland, was a slave, and he actually went back to Ireland to begin the conversion to Christianity of the people who were there. So what courage to a place as a slave and then to return as a messenger from God. And of course, we all know about his teachings based from shamrocks and clover and so on, his natural affinity as well. Christ with me, Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ in me, Christ beneath me, Christ above me, Christ on my right, Christ on my left, Christ when I lie down, Christ when I sit down, Christ when I arise, Christ in the heart of everyone who thinks of me, Christ in the mouth of everyone who speaks of me, Christ in the eye of everyone who sees me, Christ in every ear that hears me. The peace of the Lord be with us all. Thank you.